Okay, everyone, here we are, Business 900 policy. Week 4, the last part of Lawler's book, Treat People Right. This is chapter 7 through 10, and an 11th section, pretty short, called the epilogue. And then, again, some micro topics. So let's get going. Now, at this point, what we've done, remember, is some of the principles for treating people right. And what we'll do now is complete the treatment, designing work right, establishing the right goals, rewarding people right, and leading people right. The epilogue is dedicated to change. So it's a apt way, I think, to complete our review of this topic, this issue of policymaking regarding the creation of that virtuous spiral, which really is intended to allow the firm to build upon key activities, key resources, key people who exhibit innovative, creative, autonomous, and really wonderful problem solving. All of which, if it is bundled in the right way and led in the right way by good people, by good leaders, will unleash that virtuous spiral, which establishes a company's competitive position, and especially if the relationships are complicated and the cause and effect elements of the processes inside the organization, if they're kind of ambiguous and hard to figure out. And as well, there might be some kind of unique unfolding path dependence here is what we're talking about. An unfolding history develops. These things may lead to sustained competitive advantage. And let's get to the first issue. Chapter 7's topic is design work right. The idea here, organizations must design work, right, so that it's meaningful for people. That meaningfulness is caught up when we provide feedback, when we give them responsibility, and hearkening forward to Dan Pink's topic of autonomy. Job design is crucially influential upon performance. The evidence that we've seen from literature shows the following. Right? Jobs with high levels of involvement and challenge are better. They result in high levels of intrinsic motivation and a greater amount of satisfaction for the employees working in those types of jobs. This obviously has a crucial implication. You've got to avoid simplifying jobs. This, of course, is the opposite, as Lawler points out, right? It's the opposite of the scientific management movement, which attempted to standardize and simplify things, all in the name of efficiency. In that kind of vision, right, people are not expected to add much value. People are thought of as one among many inputs to the enterprise system. This was something very dominant in the 20th century, which has fallen on the wayside in the great firms, in the really successful firms. Other firms still seem to be frozen into that, and we've got to work hard as managers to induce change, and that's hearkening towards our epilogue. We also, in those settings, besides this issue, people don't add much value, we also saw higher rates of turnover, we saw a lot of absenteeism and poor quality work. So what we see is a movement in management research oriented towards the understanding of how to establish these enriched jobs, these jobs which involve high levels of involvement and challenge. How to design such jobs really has 5 elements. Element 1, right? Motivating work contains 3 psychological conditions. All of these conditions establish something called a line of sight. So let's call element 1 the line of sight. The first piece of this puzzle is that meaningfulness must be experienced. This is a psychological attribute where a person sees the work as meaningful as doing something for the world, for society, helping others. The second element of this issue of the line of sight is the person has to experience that, well, they are responsible for the outcomes. And that means we've got to generate feedback, that they have to have knowledge of the results. So the first thing, remember, creating line of sight. Second thing, let's work on the issue of meaningfulness more intensely, right? The notion is that persons have to see how they have contributed to the whole, to the complete piece of work. they have to see themselves as having produced something significant. Now, they might have a small role in the overall larger picture, but once they see the sort of grand vision of what has been accomplished, this helps build up the meaningfulness of what they do. Pixar does this. Right? You might have an animator or a sound person or one of them, many different highly specialized inputs into the creation of an animation. It's crucial that everyone who's involved in their own small ways comes to see the completed work. This means we're showing someone we value your skills, we value your input. We could not have achieved this great, larger result, outcome, right, unless your valued skills had not have been present, right? Third thing, the issue of autonomy and responsibility. You don't really achieve much of an enrichment effect without proper autonomy. So we have to make sure persons have control over things. Right? Then there's the issue of feedback. So the finished product is available. And in the context of any kind of good or service, it's crucial that the producing individuals are able to observe their customers with the product, with the service. This is really crucial, this sort of observation. Now, tangible bottom line results, of course, are crucial, and what we notice is the tangibles of enriched jobs would be the following. Reduced absenteeism, right? People decide they want to come to work. Actually, higher levels of performance are coming about, and greater levels of employee satisfaction. Now, another dimension to this involves what we call work teams. So let's think about the three types of teams Lawler mentions, just to highlight them. Right, you have problem-solving teams. You know, you give them a particular task and say, okay, we need you to solve a problem. Another type of team is what we'll call a self-managed work team. Here, the team is managing the particular tasks that it confronts. And then you have project teams, which are, right, of course, dealing with a bigger project. You also have to think about weighing individual jobs versus team-oriented jobs, partly realizing that teams are difficult to build, right? They are difficult to manage. And so you have to know whether or not an employee prefers to work alone or on a team. That, of course, is crucial information so that we can do team design properly. You also have to consider that it's possible that you may have to involve persons in some alternatives to enriched work. Now, anytime some person, you discover this, you find a person who says, look, I'm willing to do repetitive work. I'm willing to do, something kind of simple. That's fine. This might be a less skilled kind of work process. A key here, the evidence shows, is that you should offer that kind of person better working conditions. That helps to boost their satisfaction, and usually you want a little bit higher extrinsic rewards in such a setting. You also have to create dynamic jobs so that persons who are doing tasks right, are adaptable, that they have some agility, that they can move from one kind of task to another. The idea is that if you're looking at job enrichment design, the evidence shows that persons tend to do better if, as you see the variety of tasks put before them, if about 80% or more of those tasks have these enrichment characteristics, that tends to work better. And then Dr. Lawler presents to us the issue of virtual work. There's a great deal of this going on in the modern economy, and right, this is a kind of work that requires intrinsic motivations, and you've got to work at being sure that employees are actually psychologically attached to an organization. That's especially crucial to the virtual work. So the demand to make sure things are an enrichment style job are much greater with virtual work. So I think of persons who rely on computer networks. They rely on, they might be persons in the computer suite, and they might not see customers. You've got to figure out ways to expose the customer experiences to them. What are some best practices for work design? Well, first of all, you've got to give people feedback. You've got to establish good performance measures. The kind of feedback that's the best is regular and ongoing. And you've got to engage in just-in-time correction of any performance problems. Lawler mentions many enterprises, but that's a simple part of the text that you can review on your own. I also want to note that here is where the author explains a little bit more about the notion of autonomy. The idea here is taking the decision-making power and moving it downward in an organization. People have to have the power to make a decision that would influence their success. This, of course, has implications, especially for teams. How do I give teams power? Now, in this context, teams, remember, are a little bit more difficult to put into place, to manage properly. There's evidence that shows that it's okay to have, say, less supervision and, say, more autonomy for teams under a certain condition, right? Newer teams actually need some supervision. And roughly speaking, if that team is going to be, sort of long-lasting, the general evidence shows us that approximately 1 year of supervision is enough, and then you shift the team toward that more amounts of autonomy. Okay, and the summary to this, of course, is right. Management should avoid second guessing. You should avoid micromanaging. You don't want to tell people who have skills and are engaged in problem solving and who you have attempted to put into an enriched kind of job. You don't want to take away their satisfaction from working hard at identifying an issue and producing a solution. So don't micromanage, don't second guess people. There's also the notion of establishing a whole job. A whole job kind of practice is one where you're providing an employee with more breadth. So one practice that we see that has become popular is job rotation. Right here, the employee feels responsible and involved in a whole process. Remember, their meaningfulness experience is generated from getting to see the bigger pattern of things and the outcomes. You also should remember that there are technologies available now for tracking work and for providing managers with good feedback on whether or not the enrichment strategies and policies are resulting in intended results. Implications for you. Here you'd ask a question such as, hey, what is the intrinsic satisfaction for me? What factors do I detect increase my degree of intrinsic satisfaction, right? And you've got to see individuals who you're helping and come into contact with them to get a sense of how well you do. You've got to help to accomplish your own goals and contribute to team goals. You've got to work at the intrinsic satisfaction options. These are more difficult to practice. They require a collaborative effort. They require ongoing communication. You will face some challenges. You'll often spread yourself too thin. And sometimes people can tend to become somewhat invisible. They get buried in their work. So you've got to figure out a way to not become invisible. One way to do this, Professor Lawler mentions, is to make sure that you think through on a regular basis what it is that you do and update your description of your responsibilities. Maybe even do this in your CV or resume on a regular basis. And this helps you to build your career brand. Especially important if this is something you're trying to develop across a longer term. In Chapter 8, we deal with establishing the right goals. Right, organizations have to develop and adhere to specific organizational missions, the strategies, the goals, the values. Here are crucial. Employees have to understand them, support them, believe in them. And what are the impacts, right, of the goals? What impacts arise here we've got to deal with? This is, again, designing goals by thinking about, well, what is a meaningful goal? There should be something noble, something wonderful, something of sort of a broad, far-reaching implication. And that's, let's improve society, let's improve human lives in some way. It's okay to have, right, mundane financial goals in place, but you need to have a mixture. Want to as well include business performance goals. What's particularly helpful here is competitive goals. Dry performance goals are unlinked from comparables, we'll call them, or competitive. Others are running in the race too. We want to be able to see how we're doing in comparison. That's a more rich, more appropriate kind of performance goal. You want to promote and publicize your goals. That's really crucial. Repeat them as much as possible. Make it so that, right, your employees are identifying with those goals and they're coming to own them. You want to use competitive data, if at all possible, to inspire people. This tends to be, the evidence shows, a very powerful motivator. People like to be winners. They like to be parts of organizations that have faced worthy opponents, right, and have succeeded. They're motivated, especially by difficult goals, but not intensely difficult goals. You've got to establish moderately difficult goals. If you don't have a good competitor in the mix, it's good perhaps to use past performance. Again, all of this is under this rubric of making sure there's clear line of sight. Clear line of sight, the individual performance influences an entire organization. The entire organization has posed a strategy. Remember what's going on there. A byproduct of the mission, the reason for the existence of the firm, is a series of objectives. We're going to deploy resources to make sure we achieve objectives. Persons are working with key partners and key resources and key actions are being done in light of the external environmental conditions, the interior resources within the firm. These have established a particular firm strategy, and now we're engaged in that implementation work. Persons want to be able to see that what they're doing impacts that entire organization. How about best practices? How is it that persons will establish commitment to goals? Employee involvement is necessary, especially at the level of the mission statement development. You've got Professor Lawler speaking of the idea of a town meeting. You've got to take in opinions from workers. You've got to try to stretch people. You've got to push them to a high enough level to stretch them not too far. Again, this is the issue of an appropriateness. And of course, the individual goals that are established, the team goals that are established, they should improve the organization's long-term competitiveness. You want to use perhaps surveys to see whether there's a degree of goal commitment that is adequate. You want to get sort of the pulse of people that are in the organization. Possibly identify formal attitudes with surveys. When you're hiring, you've got to highlight goals here too. You got to give people kind of a realistic preview of what it would be like to work at your organization. You want to have interview questions that are focused on behavior, not so much on personality. Behavior is much more crucial. You also should provide employees with portals so that they can access data about the organization, about themselves, about employees. The board membership here is crucial. They're an exemplar part of an organization. They're the ones, of course, responsible for the strategy of an organization. The owners have put that board into place for just this purpose. So that's really quite helpful if they have an ownership stake, that they are engaged, involved, especially critical of an organization, reviewing it persistently, being sure to be up to speed on what's happening, giving them the right information, and they're providing us with appropriate feedback. When that board is owner-based and when it is active, it creates a kind of leadership message that the rest of the organization can learn from. Implications for individuals. You've got to put yourself into this strategic mode. Give yourself a mission. Don't keep it hidden away. It helps you to motivate yourself. It helps you to inspire yourself and others. Always return to your goals. Figure out your goals and figure out what your progress is in achieving them. And make sure that the employees have the data that they can use to monitor their progress. And think through how managers around you are acting in a way that shows their commitment to goals. So that's chapter 8. Chapter 9, rewarding people right. Right, organizations must devise and implement reward systems that reinforce the design, core values, and strategy of the organization. Motivation and satisfaction are crucial. You have to design the reward systems so that you are motivating persons. Again, establish a clear line of sight. Tell people the outcomes that you desire, and show people the measures that we're going to use, right, in order to identify whether we have achieved goals. Rewards. Well, rewards have to be big enough to attract attention. That way you'll be able to actually influence behavior. The general rule of thumb is rewards should be 10% or more of some sort of standardized baseline, such as an annual salary. It's also better to give pay for performance power and information so that you are actually enabling persons to influence their performance. Right? You can't be just all talk. Hey, I need you to improve. And what? You didn't give a person some power. You didn't give them some information that they need in order to actually influence their own performance. This will cause things to break down. Leadership, of course, is crucial here. You have to work at establishing credibility of a reward program. You have to kind of use these rewards and be very sensitive to satisfaction and employee development. Reward for the right kind of development that's going on, and reward fairly. Rewards are interacting with organizational effectiveness, right? They help a whole organization to achieve its mission. So you have to align the rewards with strategy, right? A firm that is a cost leader might have rewards in place for persons who innovate processes, perhaps, who show that they've met or undershot their budget limits, that they've impacted an organization by truly giving it that cost leadership position. So you want to derive your reward system around behaviors that are like that. This is a little bit different from an organization that's a differentiator. If it's an organization working in a niche category, you might need to reward innovators, engineers, and so on. Give bonuses for their smart ideas that have impacts on the organization's effectiveness. This also implies that the organizational structure has to align with rewards. So if you rely on teams, you make sure you have team-based rewards. If you rely on individual performance, make sure the rewards are oriented to individuals. That's pretty much common sense, but I see regularly organizations making a mistake in terms of how those rewards should be aligned. Culture is also very crucial here. Anytime there's an inconsistency between culture and rewards, the changes that you're desiring, the motivations that you're trying to rely upon, the motivators we'll call it, that this is all going to break apart if you don't have a culture that is aligned with the mechanisms you're trying to use. When you go to design reward systems, best practices are as follows. Right? Bonuses should be used instead of merit pay. Merit pay, it turns out, from all the evidence we see, does not reward truly outstanding performance. This is also most effective, this notion of bonuses, when you're thinking of rewarding individual performance. You have educated persons about your plan. You've told them what kind of bonus they'll achieve. There's clear line of sight. They perform. The measures indicate that they do a good job. They did everything necessary that the bonus plan indicated, and so the trigger was pulled, and you gave them the bonus. Raises need to be based on skills. This is a best practice, right? The use of performance evaluation for raises is actually going to backfire. Individual performance appraisals are a weak link, so we don't want to use them. Rather, you've got to look at skill acquisition. You've got to pay persons not for the job they do, but for the skills they're obtaining. An effective performance appraisal has the following characteristics. It should be an individual appraisal. It should also be top to bottom in an entire organization. Even senior management is going to be appraised. The effectiveness of the appraisal should be checked, right? You've got to look at survey data to indicate whether people think the appraisal process works or not. You've got to set up goals in advance. You've got to receive input from individuals who are being appraised. You want them to be involved before an appraiser reaches their final performance judgment. You've got to also separate development and reward discussions. A significant time period should exist between development types of development-based projects, like on-the-job training is happening, let's say. The reward discussion should come at a later time or an earlier time. You want to always use objective performance measures, and you need to rely on meaningful rating scales. The most generally useful method is a 3-tiered rating system. At Hewlett-Packard, there is a system that looks at a person and says, okay, how's their performance? So under the 3-tier process, a manager might say, oh, this person's performance is excellent, is good, or it is okay. Another one that I've seen get used is the swimming analogy, where somebody who is really struggling, we might say, is drowning. Then we say, oh, well, here's another individual, and they're getting better, but they're still treading water. Their head is up above the water, and they're not drowning now. Another option would be somebody who's really into their zone, shall we call it, and they're swimming well. And then for an excellent rating, someone's walking on water. What about implications? Well, no. Let me see. I just skipped a couple pages in the book. What was it I was going to think of? Oh, yeah. You want another best practice is stock ownership, right? Also, you want to make sure that persons, right, are the basis of pay, not the jobs. See, the worth of a person is not equated with the worth of their job. The worth of a person is linked with their skills and competencies. Right? So the reward mechanism should be tied to them increasing their skills and competencies. When you do an individual reward package, you avoid the problem of offering benefits to your employees that will cost more than the actual value to the employees. That's one reason why the individual reward package is favored. Team-based rewards and a variety of other types of reward systems have wound up being too costly and also not having the desired effect. You should also have a public pay type of mechanism in place. Secrecy about pay can create a lot of problems. It creates more problems than any benefits that might be received. Now to implications for you. You got to make sure your skills are actually valuable. You're bringing valuable skills to an organization, so definitely do a self-assessment and work at improving skills. Also, make sure that your reward systems are visible. You should have a challenge in place always. Challenge yourself, challenge others. Engage in a periodic audit of yourself. Are you effective? Are you doing things that are satisfying to you? Also, kind of do this for others. Look at their effectiveness, their job satisfaction. Seek as well to have a comprehensive record of your performance. Think about yourself and think, am I fulfilling my call to be the best I can be? Am I using my abilities in the right ways and for the greater good and that kind of thing? Develop skills in your appraisals as well. Give people feedback that is useful, that works, that aligns to the treat people right principles. And also ask for feedback for yourself. Chapter 10, lead people right. Organizations have to hire and develop leaders, right, who will create commitments, who will create an atmosphere of trust, leading to success. Those are persons who would motivate the work environment towards that virtuous spiral. The virtuous spiral, which leads to competitiveness, means we've got to look at first what employees want and need from leaders. The evidence shows that they want an environment that allows them to reach their goals. As well, the leader should be someone who has an employee's back. That leader should fight for resources for the employees. The leaders as well should not monopolize the credit. They shouldn't say, look what I did. They should be cognizant of the people who work under that leader. They should be persons who try to help the employees grow. And we know that workers want their leaders to be respectful, fair, and ethical. What do organizations want and need from leaders? Well, we want to count on our managers, right, to provide us with the goal setting, strategic direction, the leadership. They should be helping to identify new business opportunities. They should not become what we'll call cult leaders or special personalities in an organization. That can wind up backfiring. Now, what are some best practices for effective leadership? First off, it's important if a leadership brand can develop. That brand would have universal application to managers, to persons who are in your organization and who deal with a variety of situations. The leadership brand becomes something reliable in those situations. How do you develop leadership capability? You've got to have a management-focused approach. There has to be shared leadership processes in place. This encourages persons throughout an organization to experience leadership. You need innovation and creative thinking from persons in this regard. And you need guidelines and directions. People want initiative, but they also need some guidance. So you give guidance and don't undercut initiative as you do so. You've got to establish significant rewards so that you can help to develop leaders, recognize their work at development, and reward them for good leadership. What do we do when we want to hire potential leaders? How do we identify them? Mainly, you look at behavioral history. Then you put them into realistic job previews. See what they do on projects. See how they lead others. Kind of test them out as much as possible. Then you offer them ongoing leadership development. Right? You've got to enable them to access learning experiences throughout their careers. They have to be able to train and develop, so as an organization we must take the risk to do such things. The best way to learn, by the way, to be a leader is to be involved in a variety of difficult experiences. They will make mistakes necessarily. What they do is they learn from those mistakes. So we assess managerial performance, look at behavior, do a full range appraisal. The author calls this a 360-degree appraisal. You evaluate everything relevant. Evaluate specific issues, such as communications. How do they run meetings? How do they act in terms of sending emails, writing letters to people, etc.? You want to use objective measures. Consider the turnover issues, the absenteeism rates, the behavior of persons that the leaders have under them. You provide rewards, right, for effective leadership. Promote a human capital focus. You've got to look at the financial results, yes, of course, but you want to also look at the capabilities of your leaders and reward them for their skill development and their leadership development. You should also, it turns out, limit executive perks. The executive perk system can tend to intimidate employees, and it causes a separatedness between leaders, executives, and so on, and the rest of the workforce in an organization. And likewise, you focus on a competitive environment. When the economy is on a downturn, you're going to have to make adjustments to the leadership methodologies. But you don't demand in the basic philosophy. You keep your basic philosophy in place. You're going to have to do adjustments, right? So this is the notion of adaptable leadership. Implications for you as an individual. What it is that is crucial here to ask, I think, is to ask, well, what kind of leader do I respond best to? Maybe I can work with a certain kind of leader very well and another kind not very well. Or perhaps I have flexibility. Maybe there are many kinds of leaders that I can work with. Or maybe I want participatory type of leadership. Also ask yourself, what is your own leadership style? Are you doing best leading a team? Are you a participatory kind of leader? Or are you more of a theory X leader? You also should take people's assessments seriously, relying on their feedback so that you develop and change and work. Check others who have perceptions of your leadership. And remember that you have a huge effect on employee satisfaction. So you've got to watch yourself in the context of the organization and how you're impacting the employees. The epilogue, dedicated to managing, in a way, here we're dealing with potentially moving a virtuous spiral, kicking it into gear. So this causes change to take place. All right, we're going to figure out how to manage change the right way. First issue, starting the virtuous spiral. You've got to make sure people understand that things are going to be better for them. They have to have a kind of notion of they feel like a change in the existing conditions is necessary. There has to be leadership, right? The best CEOs are going to lead in a variety of ways. Now, they work hard at developing leaders throughout the entire organization. The CEO isn't therefore a celebrity, but rather one among sort of equals. You also have to adopt a systems approach. The 7 principles have to be systemized. You cannot simply pick and choose among them. You have to also avoid false and, shall we call it, fraudulent spirals. There must be a realistic assessment of performance and then appropriate response based upon whether we're achieving goals or not. There have to be clarity in the financial reporting systems. How about the issue of threats that are always present? You're trying to keep that virtuous spiral alive. Now, the issue of environment. The environment may change. You've got to identify those changes in your environment. It could be something changing in the competitive realm. It could be something technological. It could be something social, economic. You've got to act in that context always. In particular, Lawler calls out the issue of an economic downturn. You want to know, is this affecting an entire economy? Or is it actually affecting just a particular industry? And of course, recognize that mistakes and threats do exist because of bad decisions that will be made in terms of how persons are treating employees. They treat one another in bad ways at times. Leaders make mistakes towards their employees. So you've got to work at fleshing out these bad decisions, being open in a way that allows persons to communicate that bad decisions have occurred so that we can correct and halt those errors. You also need to avoid any kind of a fad or sort of a fashion approach to this notion. You've got to say, look, this is what all these different organizations are doing. We're going to do it too. Yay! You've got to actually establish and adapt things to your organizational culture, its mission and goals, and so on. You've got to achieve a goodness of fit, shall we call it, which kind of brings about an organizational ownership of the virtuous spiral. And of course, you want to establish your own personal virtuous spiral, and that means watching out for these same themes. Start it going, think about the threats that will possibly lead to its death, and then work hard at maintaining your own personal growth. Build yourself first. It's really a crucial theme. Now let's think about the micro topics for our week. Oh, this is week 4, so I apologize. I'll have to go back and change this slide. Bad of me. And again, I want to look at the issue of the team. I'll look at the issue of, say, leaders of teams. In this case, of course, always the CEO of an organization. And then what's next? What's sort of new in research that is important for managers? Let's look at the issue of your team and how meetings work. Now, it turns out very interesting research has been done on how teams operate. Christine Calmaford is a coach and consultant that deals with teams. A bunch of researchers went into organizations and looked at what teams do when they communicate. Now, basically, the predominant type of communication that takes place is debating, decision-making, and showing each other evidence, like sharing information, sharing of self, and that kind of thing. Then there's also requests and promises. Debating and decision-making, info sharing, and sharing oneself actually comprise about 80 to 90% of team experiences. Requests and promises are actually maybe 10 to 15% of most meetings. But effective communication actually looks differently these meetings with these classifications that are much more effective, right, are actually dominated by promises and requests. What I mean then is, right, requests which directly indicate that, hey, someone needs to do X. You have to have a clear and precise kind of request. Something vague won't help. You've got to say, hey, by the end of the day tomorrow, please write a 50-word summary of our 5 competitors ranked by annual sales. Instead of saying something like, hey, do some research on our competitors, right? You've got to be very clear. Indicate exactly what you want. And then you get somebody who is at the table who you want to fulfill the request. They should establish a commitment. The specificity is crucial. The promiser has a deadline. You've given them a particular amount of detail about what should be delivered. So now the meeting leader records the requests and the promises, and after the meeting provides a summary to everyone. How about this one? It's kind of a marketing issue. Perhaps you're thinking about one of the individual implications, establishing your own particular brand. Let's think about launching a blog. Now, I'm just going to highlight the resource for this. How you can launch a blog. This checklist comes from the Whole Brain Group. Whole, W-H-O-L-E, Brain, B-R-A-I-N, Group. The Whole Brain Group. They have a variety of helpful tools. One of them on their webpage is a free one called a blogging checklist. It covers, a list like, okay, establish what your business goals are. Do you want to inform your readers about your personal mission? Do you want to educate? Do you want to establish yourself as an expert? This kind of thing. You then have to identify your audience and get their characteristics in place. Figure out what problems maybe you can solve for your audience. Plan your content strategy. Establish a design and usability sort of set of characteristics for your blog, making sure it's user-friendly. You also, design your posts in a certain way so that you establish a right kind of content and readability. Then use a search optimization kind of methodology so that you establish good keywords. Make sure that your post is tagged properly. You want to encourage some engagement as well, and after you post, you follow some procedures to do some bit of follow-up. That's a wonderful little checklist from the Whole Brain Group. Another issue here with regard to a team. Here I'm speaking about managing persons. You want persons who are smart people making decisions, and what you want to think of to make those smart people really become better at their decisions. You've got to manage them in a manner that they're focusing on what they can do, right? Not on what a job requires. Now, the idea there is that you got to look at effective executives, effective persons, when they make decisions. You're trying to figure out, okay, look, what kind of person do we want to execute a project? Effective executives, they focus on results. Now, those are on the outside, we could call it. Now, the work that's done is happening on the inside. So this is some work from Jack Beatty. He wrote a book called The World According to Peter Drucker. He puts forward 4 questions that more effective than not types of executives are asking about persons and their decision making. First question they ask is, what has this person done well? Second question, what therefore are they likely to be able to do well also? Third question, what does this person have to learn or acquire in order to obtain full benefits from the strengths they possess? And a fourth question, if I had a son or a daughter, would I be willing to give him or her any kind of work under this person? So that's your team. Let's look at your CEO. Now, the main things here are, your own capabilities as a manager. I want to provide you with a couple of very cool tools. I want to show you a resource about how to create a checklist, about doing reviews by using the system of 3s, and Michael Porter once more. It could be that you're working on the wrong stuff, says Michael Porter. So let's think about that first issue. Get to my notes. Here's a checklist book called The Checklist Manifesto. It's by Atul Gawande. Now, that guy is a doctor, and he writes about the value of creating checklists. But I found in his book, The Checklist Manifesto, something really cool. It's a checklist all about making checklists. And what he does is he sets up a sort of thematic approach. First off, there's the issue of development. So you ask a bunch of questions that help you develop your list. Secondly, there's this issue of drafting the list. What does it look like? Is it readable? Is it uncluttered? That kind of thing. Should fit on a page and so on. And then there's the validation. You want to make sure that the checklist fits, that it works, that it's inspiring, that it has a good timetable, that kind of thing. How about doing reviews? Now, a lot of managers struggle with doing reviews. This is probably, you just can't escape this issue. And, there's a great interview in the New York Times from a few years ago. Adam Bryant did this interview of the CEO of SunGard Data Systems. The CEO's name was Cristobal Conde. And the interviewer asked, hey, what's some of the best feedback you've ever received? And I want to quote from that article from the CEO of SunGard Data. He said this, quote, "A boss once told me, Chris, you're a smart guy, but that doesn't mean that people can absorb a list of 18 things to do or 18 bits of criticism. That was very constructive criticism. Just focus on a handful of things. When I do reviews," says the CEO, "I do them in threes. I say, look, Charlie, here are 3 things you're doing well. Here are 3 things that are going awry. They're not going well." Now, that's important. Persons can work with threes. You don't hammer them with a huge list. You provide them with just enough. You don't want them to take anything personally, of course, but just enough feedback, and things should go well. Let's talk about Michael Porter. In Redux Mode on Leadership, Porter, who's at Harvard, is, of course, famous for his book Competitive Strategy. He's the guy behind the notion of the 5 forces. He says the worst error in strategy is to compete with rivals in the same dimensions. Don't compete to be the best, compete to be unique. He did some research in the last few years looking at managers, the way they behave, and noted the following. About 95% of what leaders like you will do is pursue operational effectiveness. They forget about strategic positioning. Implementation is absolutely crucial, but you need to have a good position first. You've got to establish the business enterprise as a cost leader, or as a differentiator, or along a broad spectrum. There's really 6 to a dozen possible positioning strategies. You've got to make sure you've picked that position out and that you're monitoring that. And then, of course, good implementation is crucial. How about then what's next? Now, what do I mean by authentic marketing? I want to point out a very interesting research study. And this was an examination of the great record albums of rock and roll history. And researchers think about things like, okay, look, you can be a rock star, but what about variations in terms of, persons who break out versus persons who remain, say, like a regional presence? Now, authentic marketing was uncovered as a key element of some historically very successful rock bands. Say, think of U2, a long, several decades long experience as success. But the research I'm looking at was done by marketers looking at, I can do one or two or three. Oh gosh. Gene Simmons pops up as an example, right? He's the guy from Kiss. He has a TV show, and he has licensing deals that put his image on about 2,500 different products. He goes out on speaking gigs, and his price tag for a speaking gig is $100,000. He was asked by Businessweek, about 8 years ago, some questions, and he said, all business models are the same. You have to come up with the price of goods and market it. You have to try to make a profit. Turns out wearing 10-inch platform shoes is, of course, optional. So that guy is pretty famous, Gene Simmons, in the business world. Very strong business sense. I want to focus on a remarkable thing, though. Regards Led Zeppelin's fourth studio album. Now, it's sold 23 million copies so far and still sells in the range of 7,000 units per week. Came out in 1974-ish. It spent quite a long time, about a year, on the top of the charts. It's famous for a variety of songs, such as Stairway to Heaven and Black Dog, Going to California. Some of these, of course, are classic hits. But the most noteworthy aspect of that album is it has no name. The album cover doesn't even mention the band. There's no record label. There's no text at all. There's no QR code. There's no Twitter handle. Of course, those were way not even birthed. They were way in the future compared to the 1970s. It's as if Apple unveiled an iPhone without a logo, or if Lady Gaga did not put her name or face on an album cover. This is exactly what Led Zeppelin did some 40 years ago, right? Now, the reason why this unofficially known Zeppelin 4 album has become so crucial for marketers to research is it establishes some of the conditions for authenticity. The first feature is that it emphasized substance over style. Now, Atlantic Records, the label for the group, protested greatly, but the band insisted it wanted the music itself, not the band or images or some kind of fancy logo to do the selling. Essentially, Jimmy Page was saying Led Zeppelin is making music so special that it needs to have no conventional labels, that any labels would be inadequate. The second feature is passionate dialogue. So inside the album, they found 4 interesting runic symbols. Each one represented a band member. There was no explanation. There was no context. It established a kind of a totem that instantly sparked conversation and conjecture. It was sort of a viral sensation of its day. And also, no unbundling took place. The song, Stairway to Heaven, was hugely popular, but the band never released it as a signal. See, if you wanted to get access to that song, you had to buy the entire album. I think that's pointing out the issue of authentic marketing. What about innovation versus invention? What's the difference? The answer is very straightforward. Now, this is coming from work from a Xerox legend, whose name is Karl-Heinz Brandenburg. He's the father of the MP3, we should say. He's pretty famous. Innovation and invention are different. It has to do with the degree to which something changes how we live. Right? Every business has to understand how what it is doing helps to empower persons. So you get that in place. It's kind of part of your mission statement, your value proposition. Then you insert operational excellence, and in essence, that will make your company basically unstoppable. Now, empowerment that we reference here, of course, can sound hokey, but it's really a good word in terms of considering the notion of a mere invention. Empowerment goes beyond it. In 1979, there was a graphical user interface developed by Xerox's Park Labs. Apple's Steve Jobs got a chance to look at that graphical user interface and intuitively said this is going to empower persons. In Rolling Stone some years ago, Steve Jobs said the following: "There I was in the Park Labs. Within 10 minutes of seeing the graphical user interface, it was obvious to me that every computer in the world would work this way someday. I knew it with every bone in my body." Empowerment was something that was underlying Henry Ford's vision of the Model T. He saw it as a motor car for the greater multitude. You've got to have big picture thinking and make sure your big picture is big enough. For an invention to actually rise to the level of genuine innovation, it has to improve life for persons. And if it improves life for more persons, then it is a greater innovation. How about the WIWK? So WIWIK, WIWIK. Wish I would be able to put that the right way. I don't know. I've seen it in a lot of different ways. I've seen it IWIK, which is I wish I knew. But I like the W at the front end. What I wish I knew is a way of thinking of it. According to IBM, 2.5 quintillion bytes of data are created every day. Let's try to get our mind around that factoid. You can't get it around the data. 2.5 quintillion bytes. You know, companies want to access these big data sets. Now, Christopher Frank is Vice President of Global Marketplace Insights at American Express. He was writing in Forbes, and he said, a way to approach this massive issue of rapid data creation is just to use a one-question approach. What I wish I knew. It comes to your business. What do I wish I knew when it came to my business? What do I wish I knew when it came to my customers? What do I wish I knew about my suppliers? What do I wish I would know about my competitors? This gives you focus. It helps you to avoid getting lost, right, in a sheer quantity, a flood of data. It's okay to think big. It could be essential for success. The IBM Institute for Business Value and the MIT Sloan Management Review did an executive survey. They touched base with 3,000 executives and helped to develop a 5-point methodology for basically helping managers do things in an analytics-driven kind of way so that they could rapidly create value. And the very first starting point of this was focus on the biggest and highest value opportunities. And of course, that is the second crucial rule of authentic success in business enterprises. You've got to focus on the biggest, highest value opportunities. By the way, the first rule is that you should never compete on price. And the third rule is there are no other rules. The study's authors said you have to attack the biggest challenge, but that will often involve having the biggest risk of failure. So people often don't approach that big, potentially highest value opportunity. But there's a paradox. Big problems command attention and they incite action, right? When the stakes are bigger, your best talent leaps forward. They grab onto that opportunity. They want to get involved. They want to ensure it succeeds. So what do I wish I knew? It's a very crucial cutting edge kind of assessment device when you're faced with big data. What to do task-wise? Remember, read Lawler, post in your journal, post in the discussion board, and take the weekly quiz for week 4. That's it for now, so I'll put this one up onto Blackboard for you guys.